Very happy to say I'm joined here in studio by Adrian Weckler, the tech editor here at the Irish Independent, host of the Big Tech Show, which is a podcast in your feed right now. Adrian, thanks for your time. And Jeremy Wilson has been writing about this for The Telegraph. He's their chief sports reporter. Hi, Jeremy. So, Adrian, just on the technology aspect for a moment, I am naive enough to pay for the sport I watch. So I'm curious about the realities of this world. There was a survey in the Sunday Independent in March of last year, the Ireland Thinks survey. And of all those surveyed, do you have a dodgy box? Are you illegally streaming? 15% of people said yes. Intriguingly, 7% answered, I'd prefer not to say.
Yeah, I think we can all derive what that 7% were actually saying.
Yeah. So that's a conservative 20% because I dare say a few others said, well, I'm obviously going to lie to that question. But if it is just 20%, we're talking about 400,000 Irish homes with quote-unquote dodgy box.
That sounds about right. And in fact, it was backed up by another survey later last year by a crowd called the European Union Intellectual Property Office, and they found that Ireland had the third biggest number of illegal streamers. Same sort of figure, 19-20%, behind only Bulgaria and Greece, and that it was twice as prevalent in 15 to 24-year-olds, to 34-year-olds. So that 400,000 figure in Ireland sounds about right, because particularly if you live in any kind of tight-knit community, you will know somebody, you will know some sports club or somebody that either sells you a device or a subscription, and they'll say, you know, it's a tenner a month or something, and for that you'll get, the way they pitch it is you get all of your sports, including all of the Sky Sports, all the Premier League, La Liga, all the stuff you mentioned, all your movies and everything. And it's kind of seen, it's kind of defended as a sort of a Robin Hood thing, bringing entertainment and sport to, you know, people who can't afford it. I mean, there's all sorts of complex. I've written quite a lot about this, and there's all sorts of defenses to it, and there are all sorts of fears as well. Every time I write about it, the number one, it always shoots to the top of the most read list, and the number one question that people have, and they flood in, is there any chance I'm going to get caught? So that kind of backs up the 400,000 home theory.
Well, keep them hanging for a minute on that question. Because in your piece, Jeremy, you mentioned Jonathan Edge from Liverpool, who was convicted last year at Liverpool Crown Court and sentenced to 3 years in jail for distributing fire sticks, dodgy boxes, methods of watching sport illegally. And quite interestingly, his defence, his official defence, or part of it, was the Robin Hood defence. Your Honour, my client is bringing sport to those who just can't afford these exorbitant prices. He is a Robin Hood figure.
As you said, the interesting thing, I mean, it got an incredible amount of traction, this piece. So it obviously does resonate with people, whether that's at the level of people who are using sort of illegal methods, or whether it's just people who feel that the prices are unfair and they're priced out, and so they're interested in the issue. But huge amount of traction as well, and interest from the broadcasters and indeed Premier League sports governing bodies. So it's like the whole ecosystem, whether it's fans to broadcasters to right, you know, the people putting on competitions are obviously hugely engaged in at the moment. But it doesn't seem like the prosecutions at the moment have been going. I'm not aware of one that's gone after at the level of the actual user, as it were, a person that, you know, sort of an individual that's taken up one of these subscriptions. And I did sort of put that to people in the conversation, whether that was sort of had been considered, whether that would be seen as a deterrent or an overreaction. And I think it was felt, the analogy was used repeatedly by broadcasters and by people involved in this sort of anti-piracy was of sort of the drug analogy, and that it tends to come down the chain. It's quite at the top level. It's quite an international thing where people are modifying, whether it's boxes or fire sticks, so that they can host these apps, and then they're selling them on down. And the focus seems to be the suppliers at the moment, rather than the end, the final user. But it certainly like you, Shane, I'm sort of was quite naive of the issue to start with, and it just said I sort of said, well, surely the deterrent would be if people saw prosecutions at an individual level, but then people were talking about the kind of previous precedent with music streaming sort of decades ago, and how that it didn't end particularly. I don't know the detail of it, but it was felt that I think there's a concern of keeping a level of goodwill with the ultimate viewer and fan, and I don't know if there's obviously a balance between how heavy-handed you are in terms of going after sort of one person who may have access to it, and the suppliers. Certainly, certainly the message was all options are sort of open. They're not saying they wouldn't, but from the cases that we've seen and have been highlighted, certainly by the Premier League, it tends to be the suppliers that are the focus for what they're going after enforcement wise.
Similar story here.
Yeah, it's a delicate dance that happens here, because this is something that I always try to clarify when reporting on this story. Will the authorities go after individuals, you using one of these things in your home? And only once have I managed to get An Garda Síochána here in Ireland to actually say to me in writing, An Garda Síochána does not issue cease and desist letters and effectively will not pursue users in their home. So, but that's a tricky message to get out.
I'm surprised they even put that in writing ever.
Well, they did. Yeah. They did. And the main organisation that takes the lead in Ireland on this, there's a few international organisations, and there's a few European-wide ones, and there's cross-border investigations and prosecutions. But the main one who go after the sellers, the people making some serious money out of selling you the subscription or selling you the altered Fire Stick or the dodgy box or whatever, it's a crowd called the Federation Against Copyright Theft. They're active in the UK as well. Now, what they do is they essentially line things up. They send out letters. They figure out who is selling these things. They monitor things like Facebook and Instagram, where a lot of the leads for these come. And then at the point where they think they've identified somebody who's actually selling the kit or selling the service, they then go to the guards, and the guards will then take action. But they will only go after those distributors. They won't go after the users. Now, I know that every time I write about this, that the only reason it goes to the top of the most read charts is people are wondering, because they've got a guilty conscience as such, and they're thinking, am I going to be done for this?
Well, I also think, so you say you take 400 households in Ireland. That's a lot of people. And in the UK, Jeremy, your piece quoted the Intellectual Property Office estimating almost 4 million people in the UK had used an illegal source to watch live sport of the previous year. So 4 million people, let's conservatively say guts of 1 million households, give or take. I suppose, Adrian, the point is of those 400,000 people in Ireland, in almost every other aspect of their life, they're law-abiding. And so they really do not want to be named in a newspaper or reprimanded in any kind of official way, given any kind of record, perhaps. And so I'd say at the first, and it's an interesting one for the guards, I'd say at the first sign of a crackdown on the individual, that just that hint of a deterrent, I think a huge percentage of those 400,000 would say, well, this isn't worth it, let's get out of here. But at the moment, there's a degree of wink and a nod, you'll be grand. And so that's why every time you write a piece about it, there's a quick check to see, do I need to be a little bit more careful here or not? That'd be my read on it.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, again, it's a tricky one for the guards. So the Copyright Act of 2000, lest anybody out there listening to this thinks, no, you have your facts wrong on this. My dealer told me that it wasn't illegal.
Are we calling them dealers?
It's distributors. Actually, it's not that much better. The Copyright Act of 2000 says, and I'm quoting, a person who makes, sells, rents or lends, or has in his or her possession, custody or control a protection defeating device, knowing or having reason to believe that it has been or is to be used to circumvent rights protection measures, or provides information or offers or performs any service intended to enable or assist a person to circumvent rights protection measures, shall be guilty of an offence. So if you are using a dodgy box to access a dodgy stream, an illegal stream, a copyright defeating stream, you are actually committing an offence under the Copyright Act of 2000, and it's punishable by a fine or going to jail. Now, when I write that, when I lead, say, an article like that, I would say it has a bit of a cooling effect. When that's the narrative, it probably does have a bit of a cooling effect. But then after a while, when nobody gets arrested for it, exactly to your point. And I've one acquaintance, I'll call them an acquaintance, who uses a dodgy box, okay? Not a friend, not a colleague, an acquaintance. And their rationale to me is they're a big Liverpool fan. And because of the way the rights have been divvied up, as you mentioned earlier on, they can't see every Liverpool game. And so they don't want to break the law, but the reason they do, they say, is because the rights holders have forced them into it. There's about 4 or 5 different versions of that defence that I hear quite a lot. The sports rights companies, Sky, have too much money. I already pay, €90 a month. This is a tax on poor people. There's quite a lot of, stuff that you will hear in its defence. But at the end of the day, it's an offence.
Yeah, Jeremy, I presume there's a similar attitude in the UK. My sense here is if you had a group of friends sitting around and 1 or 2 of them confessed to pick an average 10 crimes off the top of your head, there'd probably be mixed responses in the group as to whether or not they should be doing that. But I would be fairly confident if somebody said, well, I'm using a dodgy box to watch the match. I don't think anybody in the group would say, but that's so unfair on these big TV companies and streaming services, don't you think? I think the Robin Hood defence would actually curry plenty of favour in society, if not quite in the courtroom.
Yeah, and I think that's why the sports governing bodies and broadcasters are keen to make a noise about this, because they're really trying to tackle this normalisation, what they would call it. There was, one of the suppliers, part of his sentence was for using the box as well. That was very heavily pointed out to me when I said, does anybody ever? But it was still a supplier, the reason he got caught. But his sentence, as I understand it, was increased because he was also a user. So it's perhaps still doesn't quite have the same message as just a user sort of facing a criminal sanction. But that was quite an interesting sort of point that was put to me. But I think that's really why they're so active on it, because of this idea that it's being normalised. The broadcasters' view is we invest billions of pounds in creating, what they would see as a wonderful, I know you probably get, social media will have their own view of sort of the pundits and what have you, but what they think is, what is basically a very slick, brilliantly produced product. And as in all facets of the media, I'm sure it's the same for your organization. There's that question of, well, why would you don't invest lots of money in journalism or producing some sort of content to effectively have it given away, because in the end your model becomes redundant. Now, without really knowing the ins and outs of a company like Sky or TNT Sports or BN Sports books, I don't know how close they are to those sort of margins. The fact that, as you said at the outset, Sky's domestic rights in the UK certainly still went for close to 7 billion. Premier League's rights went close to 7 billion, suggests that everything's holding out reasonably well in spite of the piracy. That there's obviously quite a lot of income still coming in. Otherwise, you'd see that fall dramatically.
Well, do you know what's interesting though? I looked into those figures because I was curious about that as well, because you could read 7 billion for this current suite of rights and think, well, everything's just dandy. But this is a 4-year deal as opposed to a 3-year deal. So if you look at a per season number, the price has actually dropped by maybe $500 million. And if you take as well the 2015 agreement, which was the high watermark, was the most amount of money, that was also for fewer games. They've thrown in another 99 games for the TV companies. So actually, the value of each individual game has gone down 50%. The companies, TV companies and streaming services are paying 50% less per game than they were at the high watermark of 15. Now, I don't feel sport is less popular. I would suspect piracy has to be a huge aspect of that drop, no? Or maybe not.
No, I was going to come on to that and say that was the big thing that happened in the TV deal. It's suddenly 270 games, I think, off the top of my head, rather than 200. that the TV companies are getting. And I know the Premier League clubs were all sort of saying in the meeting about when this deal was put to them, sort of, well, why are we giving away more for the same amount of money? But that was the deal that was before them. And there was definitely a sense talking inside clubs that the kind of model, which was very much the Premier League model of big subscription TV and pay deals, at some point we're going to have to kind of navigate into this world of streaming that perhaps these club executives don't not sort of fully across because their business hasn't really had to do that. And I think there is just that feeling that perhaps the next round at 2029 is when the model in some way will have to change. Difficult to. I mean, there's the whole aspect here as well. I mean, I'm curious to hear that it's such an issue in Ireland. I presume the 3 p.m. broadcast blackout on a Saturday isn't an issue with most of the sports that you would be talking about. But and that's another reason that's often given by fans based in England.
Yeah, we don't have the 3 p.m.
Yeah, that's so it's interesting that the kind of the justifications, because the Premier League very much their research says that you're always going to have people, if you've got someone who's going to undercut the market, you're always or virtually make it available for nothing, you're always going to have people who are willing to take on these streams. And that's in response to the arguments that are given for why it's inevitable, which is that they say a lot of the games are not available in England, but in countries where they are available, there still seems to be the same problem. So I'm not sure, how much that argument stands up. And obviously on the costs one as well, they would say the same thing. So I don't think it's an issue that's going to go away. But I think what will become more of a debate in the next 2-3 years as we go to the next deal is kind of is the model still the right model, because it's a model that has underpinned Premier League success and by extension English football's kind of financial wealth for the last 20-30 years, and it does feel like it's under a threat like it hasn't been before.
Adrian, I suppose one of the reasons it's such a threat is if you take it that the Gardaí policy will continue as is, it's a pretty effective service. It works pretty well for the people who could end this route. Again, someone in my world, anecdotal evidence. I was quite surprised this person said to me, I'm after getting a dodgy box. Didn't strike me as the sort. They are law-abiding to a T in every other aspect of their life. And their logic was, it's too expensive. It's insane. And so I'm doing this. And how it worked was somebody that he knows said, yeah, text this number. He WhatsApps the number. Okay, send your money here. He sends the money for a year up front. I mean, if it doesn't work, I don't know what your recourse is, but he sent his money up front and this little stick arrives in the post. I'd always thought dodgy boxes were boxes. They're generally sticks.
Yeah.
And he into the back of his TV and, he's watching the Liverpool match that's not on Sky. He's watching it on beIN Sports feed or on a CBS feed or any number of feeds. And a year on, he's signed up for year 2 and he's WhatsApped his mate again and said, this is great. So his experience, if it's common, that's another worry for the big TV companies here is this isn't like, sometimes back in the day when I was younger, you'd be trying to stream something potentially illegally online and you get 8 seconds of it and then the website would crash and it was just unpleasant. There is nothing unpleasant about the experience I've seen this person have.
Yeah, I'd add a little bit of nuance and context to that. So I remember 2 years ago, I was in a sports club somewhere on the south side of Dublin, I won't say where, and Katie Taylor was fighting. And they had a screen in the club hall room and there were about 100 people there. And it was clearly a dodgy box because every 60 seconds it froze for about 5 seconds. There was an interruption at one point during the stream. There were 2 things I took away from that. Number 1, use of a dodgy box is now communally accepted. The second thing is that the quality can be a little bit glitchy. So the bet you take with a dodgy box, I'm guessing for those who subscribe to it, is that for the money you're paying, which is something like around a 10 or 15 quid a month, something like that of the services that have been highlighted in the court documents, Typically, that's what you pay. And because it's so much less than you would pay for the equivalent access to sports and premium content, that you'll take the risk. Okay. I mean, look, I've been in scenarios where someone has been playing that I've wanted to watch. I haven't been close to a device. There's a penalty shootout or something. I'll go looking on a social media stream sometimes for a live, and it's glitchy, it's low res and everything, but it will do the job in the moment. Now that's in an extreme circumstance, because I'm like you, I kind of feel guilty about it, so I do end up paying for the services, and it's generally a better experience on your device, on your phone or whatever. But it's accepted to a wider degree than we would like to admit. The quality is probably better now than it used to be, but there's a large caveat with that. It's not unusual for dodgy box streams to either just cut out altogether or to glitch a little bit. Now, if it glitches a little bit, you tend not to hear complaints about it, because the money they're paying is so much less. When it cuts out, you do sometimes hear about it, but it tends to be people who pay for it. It's not like they go on Facebook and or ring up Joe Duffy and complain about it, So there's a kind of subterranean in exactly the process you described about a fella I know and a WhatsApp number, and his stick comes in the mail, and send your money to this address or to this bank account. That's very much the scope of it. And I suppose you might say that represents a natural ceiling on the activity. Like, I spoke to a couple of people in the industry, in the television industry, and they are not as worried about it as they used to be. They think that despite that Sunday Independent survey, Ireland's Think survey, which showed 15 plus 7%, and the European copyright survey around 20% in Ireland, they think it peaked about 18 months ago, 2 years ago. So, and they can kind of live, they didn't say this to me, but the vibe I got was that they can kind of live with, 1 in 5 people going off the range to access stuff, to pirated stuff, because we're in an internet area, and no matter what you do, that's always going to be the case, particularly in a context where authorities don't actually prosecute personal users. So I'm not sure that we're looking at a massive uptick in this. This might just be it now. It kind of might be, yeah. It kind of might be, and for whatever, just as Jeremy was suggesting there, in terms of the cases that he was writing about, for whatever value that they have, it is a reminder, like the Federation Against Copyright Theft and others like them, it still is probably worth their while, apart from the fact that they're part funded by the TV companies. It is worth their while to pursue these cases and to have these cases hit the headlines, and for the court cases to be reported, because it does remind people. There's always going to be people like you and I who just maybe are a little uneasy about doing it.
Mm. A kind of curious aspect to this, Jeremy, worth mentioning is that Amazon increasingly obviously are looking for Premier League games and are showing Premier League games. And it would seem that their Fire Stick is one of the real gateways to this world. It seems to be quite hackable. You were talking about how even YouTube videos can show you how to unlock a Fire Stick. Are they coming under a certain pressure to close that off, or not much they can do?
They are not publicly, but certainly behind the scenes. There was certainly people in other broadcasters that were sort of saying that they were citing Apple to me, because Apple obviously has a TV box, but that is, as I understand it, is in what they called a closed environment. So you can't put anything on there, or it's very difficult to put things on there that are outside of Apple. Whereas Amazon, it's the Fire Stick's what they called an open environment, which means it's much more. So it comes it comes with a warning from Apple saying, from Amazon saying, you shouldn't be careful. You shouldn't download outside apps that you don't know what they are, and so there's obviously nothing on the Amazon stick as it comes and on their app store. But as a device, and I guess it's the same, it's a mechanism, it's a conduit like the boxes. As a device, it's been found to be easier to put the apps on that then go and find the illegal streams than certain others. And I suppose because there's a familiarity now with Fire Sticks, that's why the pirates are using it. So certainly I definitely got a very clear idea from some of the broadcasts. They didn't want to go on record about it, but certainly they felt, well, surely Amazon have got to look at this to try and do what Apple have done and make it more difficult. I don't think they think it's going to shut everything down, because obviously it's a whole game of cat and mouse, and the pirates will find another way or another device or whatever. But it's kind of like, well, you're rights holders as well. Surely this is bothering you as much as us. And so it's an interesting sort of subplot.
It is, yeah.
Definitely a tension there. The other thing that was, I'd be interested in Adrian's sort of expertise on this, because certainly something that was highlighted to me a lot was that by using these devices, you're wide open to kind of identity theft and malware on your devices, that they're not very secure. You could be now that's obviously being highlighted by sports governing bodies and broadcasters who are very keen to get the message out that this shouldn't be happening. But I just wondered how real in practice that issue is from a technological point of view. Because it's not my area of expertise, but it was certainly a point that was put to me quite forcibly when I was making calls on it.
There's two answers to that, and by the way, it makes perfect sense why the rights holders would keep making that argument. Yes, you are more at risk of identity theft, given that the person you are paying may be actually part of a criminal gang, criminal enterprise, a wider network, which brings all of those details together and may then sell them on the dark web or whatever. Now, there is some evidence that some of that has happened. As for your box attracting or your device attracting malware, I would have to say that's a receding risk. So in the early days of dodgy boxes, often they were like set-top boxes that you bought. In fact, a lot of local sellers on street corners would sell them. You'd see like a local TV technology seller selling aerials and dishes and things like that. And some of them would have notices inside their shop saying, get free TV forever. And they thought they were operating within a loophole within EU law. They weren't, but there was a period when they were selling those devices, and those things were a lot more open and a lot more attracted a lot more malware because of the route that they took to actually pull the streams online, for want of better explanation. The modern day Fire Stick environment is a little bit more locked down, and you don't hear about that as much. The identity theft issue is still real because of the people who are selling you the service and whose details, the people you are paying, and whatever details you give them. That's probably the extent of it, I would say.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess we'll see what happens over the coming years. It will be interesting, Jeremy, if as Adrian's source suggested, maybe we have reached a peak, or if it continues and maybe TV money declines. It's going to be fascinating. I mean, I think most people feel the game is a touch rigged and things are just out of control. The players are paid too much money because the television companies are paying too much money because they're charging too much money. And I don't think anyone feels sorry for the whole industry at large. No,
that's certainly the response that we got from readers and on social media to it. I mean, I still don't really buy it as a justification, because I still think that in the end you're probably some sort of market's going to exist, whatever. So I think there's two separate questions. I think we're all in a media space where there's a challenge of people, a kind of culture of people expecting things for nothing that cost a lot of money to actually produce, whether it's journalism or producing football content. But clearly, absolutely, there is a separate issue about fans and the cost of football and the cost of ticket prices, which are, have ridiculously spiraled. That it's terrible that fans have felt priced out. I think the way that the TV deals are broken down, you sort of spoke about it at the outset. Sky. I mean, a rule came in that Sky were no longer allowed a monopoly. So competition law precludes only one TV company from screening Premier League matches in the UK. And you kind of think, well, who's that really helping? Because as long as there's an open auction, I'm not sure the viewer really wants it broken down into multiple companies.
No, people
I
people
think,
people harken back to the good old days of everything on Sky.
yeah, so I think there's lots of separate questions to, whether it's right to use a box, but it creates a sort of perfect storm where there's an environment where it's normalized because of those other feelings about the wider cost of football.
Yeah. Is sport, Adrian, the big driver of dodgy boxes, by the way?
Oh,
More,
yeah.
more so than movies or anything else?
Absolutely.
Sport all the way.
You see, like, we haven't even talked about the streaming companies. Sorry, you did introduce Amazon going to live sport, but you have to think about this from a TV economics point of view as well. So what has happened since 2015 in the last 10 years? Well, Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, Paramount Plus, Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, all of the big streamers now have a exponentially larger chunk of our living room time on the money that we pay. So Netflix, for example, this week just announced blockbuster subscription figures. Their password sharing crackdown has absolutely worked. Way more subscribers. They're hiking the monthly subscription fee. They're doing it in the States next month. They'll probably follow suit in Ireland in the next couple of months because they do every 18 months or 2 years. So as a proportion of your household income, the amount of money, because you won't cancel your Netflix subscription. I don't care who is listening to this saying, but that's it, I'm cancelling Netflix. You won't, believe me. So that means you're going to be spending more on those services, which means you actually have slightly less to spend on your Sky Sports. That may actually be a bit of a driver to dodgy boxes as well. People are making that decision. Well, I'll pay some for Sky or Virgin, and the portion I was using to pay for, say, Premier Sports or TNTs or whatever the additional sports package was, I will now reserve for. I'm going to have Paramount Plus this week because I want to watch Yellowstone, and when that's done, maybe I'll go back to it. So I think the streamers' influence is a kind of a very under-discussed part of the entire economics of this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the final total. All my entertainment, including sport.
All my entertainment.
What's the sum total?
But sorry, you were asking specifically about is sport the main driver, and there's no question. I mean, it's no mystery as to why Apple, Netflix now with wrestling, we call it a sport if you want, Amazon Prime Video, like there's no mystery as to why they're getting to sport. I remember interviewing Reed Hastings, Netflix CEO of Netflix rather, a few years ago, and they were saying, no, we're not going to get into live sport because that's not what we do. Guess what? A few years later, that's what they do because people will pay the money for sport. I will. That's by far, there's a reason why your Sky Sports is by far the most, the chunkiest bit of your monthly subscription.
What you said at the outset as well about the that research that suggested that it was younger people were more likely to, and I just think that as an industry, sport it's clearly looking at it, and it's all I can come from a generation where I'm sort of used to that subscription model, but clearly people of the age of like my children are going to have a completely different view of what should be available to them and how it should be available to them, and it's obviously going to be a massive adaptation and change potentially that the company's going to have to look at.
They've also less income. It's like attendances at Premier League games. The average age is going up. I mean, what 22-year-old wants to pay 40, 50 euro a month to watch sport?
So, I mean, I'd be fascinated how the next round of the, because in the end that there's a sort of argument that can be made that they will adapt to whatever the real world is, and if they can't fully if the market is saying this is how it needs to be done in a different way, I presume they'll, whether it's through streaming, Premier League have set up their or in the process of setting up their own production company, and where people think that could accelerate a move towards a kind of season pass type model for clubs or from the league itself. But I mean, it's all very hypothetical, but presumably they have to look at what the younger age is moving towards, and organisations like the Football Supporters Federation, which are very much sort of behind the 3 p.m. blackout. I think it's different among sort of teenage supporters because it's just these sort of traditions and norms that are just so different in how people consume and expect to consume things. So it'll be really interesting how it adapts and evolves in the next sort of 10 years.
It sure will. Okay, fellas, we will leave it there. Thank you very much. Adrian Weckler is the tech editor here at the Irish Independent. He is the host of The Big Tech Show, which is a podcast in your feeds right now. And Jeremy Wilson, writing about this issue and more besides as chief sports reporter with the Daily Telegraph. Thanks, fellas.